welcome to the Rebookery channel. Today I wanted to show you a couple of things that you could do with art journals or just old altered books in general. A lot of times when I'm doing a craft show and people are not familiar with art journals, they will ask me, well, what do I do with this? So aside from planning and journaling and scrapbooking, you can really put whatever you want in them, but this is one of my most favorite books, if not my absolute favorite book, that I made probably about 6 years ago. And it was before I knew how to make altered books. So I didn't do it the right way. So you can tell it's fallen apart, but nonetheless, it is still my absolute favorite. And I'll even go back and I'll add some stuff to it every now and then. So this is a poetry journal, and I used to teach elementary school for about 10 years, and one of my favorite things was having my kids make poetry journals, and so this is kind of a spin-off from that, because now I teach secondary kids and we don't make poetry journals. So I started off with an old novel, just, falling apart. I don't know how many times somebody had read it. It was just, found at a thrift store. And I just kind of went in and started adding my favorite poems, and I decided to add some artwork to it. And then the cover kind of evolved from there. So I'll talk about the cover after I show you the inside. So on the inside, it starts with a poem that my husband had written to me back in 1997. And then these are just a collection of some of my favorite poems. I always tell my students my brain is this big, so I'm not into really long prose and poems that have a lot of, hidden meaning. I'm pretty much, I like it to rhyme and I like it to make sense, and if it can be, in about this big, if I can get all the words in about this much room, then I'm good with it. And a lot of these poems are ones that I used whenever I used to teach elementary, or poems that I remember when I was a kid. So this is one of my favorite poems that I remember when I was a kid, called The Goops, and it was in a book that my mom used to read to us all the time, and we used to just think this was the funniest thing ever because the pictures of the Goops were hilarious. But then my mom would call us Goops if we acted like the Goops. So the first line is, the Goops, they lick their fingers, the Goops, they lick their knives. And so it was just a poem that has always stuck with me. So I found the poem and put it in here, and then just added some of my own artwork. And I actually put my own children's names in here because they remind me of the Goops. Langston Hughes poems. This is one that I used a lot with my students, my upper elementary students. And I just, this was like a scholastic weekly reader that my students were reading, and I just cut out the hot air balloons and put them on and printed out the poem. My absolute favorite poem is by Christina Rossetti. She's my absolute favorite poet. And this poem was one that I would have up on a big chart when I was teaching my kids how to read, and we would read this poem every day, and it would hang in the room. So this is a poem that I use over and over and over again in my journals, but it's called Is the Moon Tired? So to make this, I just painted the background a dark color, and then I used the window out of like a security envelope. I typed out the poem on some vintage tablet paper, and then just stuck it behind that window, and then just took, I think these are actually candy wrappers, chocolate wrappers, and then little bits of envelopes, and I just cut them out and put them around the sides. And then this is probably an oil pastel. Whenever I used to teach poetry in my classroom, I would put the poems on these gigantic chart pieces of paper. And then I would put an illustration to go with it, and I would always use oil pastels because it was just, I don't know, something about the way it was and the way you could blend it. For someone like me that's not very good at drawing, it seemed to work really well. So this is one of my favorite poems, or this is my favorite poem and one of my favorite spreads in this journal. This is Fog by Carl Sandburg. And for this one, you can actually see I'll hold it up here and see. You can actually see the pages from the original book, and then I just added a layer of glue and some cotton batting. So this one's the fog, and the fog comes in on little cat feet, and so I thought this was a perfect representation of that poem because it looks like fog. This is one that my kids used to love reading all the time in class. So this is actually a transparency from my old teaching elementary days, and I glued it down on this paper. How I got it to stick, I have no idea. And then I just took some tissue paper and glued it on the page. The cool thing about this journal is that this was when I was first starting art journaling, and so every single one of these pages is an experiment. It was like I had no idea where I was going or what the different materials would do on this book. It was just me having fun with these poems, and because I wasn't worried about writing anything, I was more focused on the art part of it, and so it just, you know, the writing was there, it was the poem, and then I could just focus on whatever I wanted to do art-wise. So this was, I had a lot of fun working in this. It was probably about 3 months worth of work that I did, and I loved every minute of it. This is Langston Hughes again, and anything that has to do with rain, I love. So these are all rain poems. So this one's by Langston Hughes, and I just printed it out and then that's one thing I like to do is take the poem and cut out the different lines. This is another poem about rain. Here's one called Brooms by Dorothy Aldist. Mushrooms are umbrellas. I love that one. And then The Pickety Fence by David Mccord. Oh, this was the one that my students would always beg to read because they loved how it sounded. Give it a lick, give it a lick, give it a lick with a rickety stick. Pickety, 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 pick. And they loved that. And this was a great poem for teaching them how to read, so I had to include that one in here. And then these are just illustrations from the Mushrooms Are Umbrellas. This is just an illustration from that. This was just me cutting apart some scrapbook paper and making a fence. And then the two poems together kind of went together. I actually added this page just last year, and I love the way it turned out. So this page was a poem by Aline Fisher, and it was about flowers at night. And so I just took a field guide on flowers and just cut out different flowers and stuck them on here. And then I decided to use some washi tape and of course some lace down the side and some produce stickers. But I actually took the words or the text from the book and just cut them apart and just added those little lines of text in, not necessarily because I wanted to know what they said, but because it just kind of added some extra interest. And then I did a little bit of work with colored pencils, and I'll hold that up a little bit so you can see. This paper that I printed, or that I wrote this on, was just a piece of paper that I got at, I think it was an art store, it was a little notebook. So I really like this one. This poem is kind of funny because my favorite fruit are plums. And so when I found this poem, I loved it because it was about plums. And I just happened to take a picture of a plum I was eating that day. But when I showed this to my daughter, she's like, "Mom, you don't even know, that's not even what the poem is really about." And so I was like, "What do you mean that's not what the poem is about?" So I did some research and found out that eating the plums is really not what this poem is about. Supposedly there's hidden meaning to it. So remember, my brain is this big. So I didn't know that, and it was just because she was in high school at the time, and so she had just gotten through studying this poem, and so she enlightened me. But whatever, I love the poem. I love the art that I put with it, which was just little detail pen work and some trim down the side. And then I actually took part of the original text. Actually, the more I think about it, I think this was a science fiction book. So the original text from the book, I let some of it peek through, and here was the really cool part. So once I found out that the book had hidden meaning, I started to look at some of the text that popped out at me. So like this one was supposedly couldn't refuse. This one was tolerable but extremely attractive. I need a man to purchase my services. Fancy that. So it just was kind of funny how it kind of all worked out, and it's a little ironic. But I still think the poem is about plums. This one is, I tried embossing. So this one was kind of fun to just play around with embossing. This was another one that my students loved reading, called Weather by Eve Merriam. She had a lot of great poems. This is another poem over here by Christina Rossetti, and this was about rain. So I put more than one poem on a page. This is a Langston Hughes poem called I Too Sing America. This is a beautiful poem, but the artwork that I did with it, I had so much fun with this. So this was all cut and paste, and so I cut out a piece of paper that was flocked to make it look like wallpaper. I cut out a piece of cardboard and made it look like a table, put a piece of fabric, just cut some stuff out of scrapbook paper to make it look like a bowl with fruit on it. And then I actually have a book of Langston Hughes poems, and so I took a picture of the cover, shrunk it down, printed it out, and then went outside and found some twigs and glued the twigs on, and then actually sewed them on, tacked it onto the paper to look like it was a picture hanging from the wall. And I just fell in love with that. I thought that was one of my smarter ideas that I had done with art, because like I said, I don't draw very well, but I can cut and paste the heck out of something. So actually this got featured in Somerset Studio Gallery Winter 2017. So they just included this little part right here, and just put out to the side how I had done that. And then I love the pen work on the side. This is a poem that I actually found that I had written in high school. And so this was some journaling that I had about that poem that I wrote. This is another Langston Hughes, The Dream Keeper. And I stitched on some vintage fabric. And I love how this looks just very dreamy, and very ethereal with the colored pencil, and it's kind of washed out. I'd originally put this poem in the journal, and you can kind of see some of the words, but I hated it. And so then I went back last year and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so ugly. So I fixed it. So I just did a wash of paint and then put the poem back on. These were vintage like rub-ons. So I vintage rub-on some of the words to the poem, and the rest of them I just wrote out. And I like this version much better than the one I had before. Oh, I love this one. I forgot how much I love this one. So anything that has to do with space and science, I am all in. This poem is by Marcy Hands, and it's called Fueled. And I'm going to go ahead and read this one to you just because it's just so beautiful. Fueled by a million man-made wings of fire, the rocket tore a tunnel through the sky and everyone cheered. Fueled by only a thought from God, the seedling urged its way through the thickness of black, and as it pierced the heavy ceiling of the soil and launched itself up into outer space, no one even clapped. Oh, I love that one. So, drew a rocket, lots of people, glitter, some paint, drew a seedling, added some lace, and yeah, love that one. This is the poem that I would start every year off with on the first day of school. When I taught first grade, this is the poem we would learn, and this is the one that the kids would remember throughout the year, was Bubblegum, Bubblegum. And so this is basically how I would teach them to read, is I would put up a poem every couple of days, and we would take apart the poem, and we would take apart all of the chunks of the words and the different parts of speech, and that's how I would teach the kids to read. So this poem has a lot of sentimental value to me, so I had to include it in the journal. This one, by John Hall Wheelock, sorry. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but it's written in red, like I wrote the poem in red. So this is not my artwork. This was an actual illustration from a book that I got the poem out of. And then I just glued it on here and then painted the background and added my own pen work. So it kind of looks like it's my illustration, but it's absolutely not my illustration. So I want to make sure everybody knows that is not my illustration. But this is a book about space. And again, absolutely love this. This is one of those ones. So it says, Earth. A planet doesn't explode of itself, said dryly the Martian astronomer gazing off into the air. That they were able to do it is proof that highly intelligent beings must have been living there. So just the irony of this poem. And again, found parts from the original page that I thought would be really awesome to enhance this poem. And so I left those exposed. So like this one says, an act of aggression. To escape this catastrophe that the natives dug to the heart of the planet. A planet's life system reacted. Seasoning of cosmic debris. So, love that one. This is just the actual text. I haven't done anything to this page. Somebody had asked, how do I prep my books? Now I do it a lot differently than I did back then. But basically what I did back here was I would just glue a couple of pages together to make them thick. Now I know, that you don't want a book really, really thick because it'll break the spine. So I actually tear pages out now. But this was back then, before I knew anything. This was a lot of poems about night, some that I hand wrote. This one was kind of cool because I was really into packing tape transfer. So this was a packing tape transfer, and underneath it I put a piece of tissue paper. So the poem actually comes out, stands out from the tissue paper underneath. Again, this was just total experiment in art. First Snowflake, another one that my students loved reading. And just me painting and adding, these were little pipe cleaners that I sewed on and little pictures from books. Another Langston Hughes poem. This one is called Mother to Son. And I did this one originally with, again, the flocked wallpaper. I put corrugated cardboard on here and then put tissue paper over it to look like stairs. And then I have a chandelier stamp. And then I was just thinking something about velvet. So I did velvet down the side. But then I went back a couple years later and I added these little cigar labels and this soda label that I got from, I think it's Crafty Lisa's Vintage Crafty Lisa. She's got an Etsy shop, and we've traded some journals for some ephemera before. I will look her up and put her link in the comments below. But she has some really cool ephemera. This one I haven't done too much to. This was a just an experiment with little ink pads, and I had a die cut of a cloud, and I would put the cloud down and then swipe the ink pad to it, and it would like have a negative effect, and then it would look like the clouds were, surrounded by blue sky. So this was another experiment in art. This trim actually came from some silk curtains that I had at our old house. And this was just my handwriting on some little notebook paper, a Langston Hughes poem. This one was kind of cute because this is a Jack Perletsky poem about the goblin. And so just playing around with writing the poem down and then cutting it all out. One of my kids' favorite poems that we used to read, Pop Poppity Pop. So this was just a packing tape transfer again. And then I put some cowboy paper underneath it. This was a pocket, and in some ephemera that I bought, or a book that I got at an estate sale, just happened to find a poem that someone had written. Her name was Rena, and she had written this poem, and I thought it was very pretty, and so I sewed it onto a tag and just stuck it into this little envelope. This was, of course, Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, and just some journaling that I had put in here. This was an envelope and a bead, some cutouts from a magazine, but just my own thoughts about traveling. The Witch's Ride, I was using, I think, chalk pastels here and some dark purple paint, and then just some cutouts. This, I don't have a poem to go with. This was just me playing around with paint and some tissue paper to give that textured look, and then this pretty picture of these birds, and so I kind of framed it with some scrapbook paper, but I have no poem to go with that yet. This is another Carl Sandburg poem. This is The Buffalo Dusk, and it's about the buffaloes, you know, where they are and how they used to be here and they're not here anymore. So this was an illustration from the actual book. I Mod Podged over it, so it's pretty hard. And then some more ephemera that I got from Lisa, and then just Trader Joe's sticker and just some interesting little things, some lace. I think here, because this page is so thick, I think it was because I didn't like the poem that I had, so I must have glued it together. This one is by Sarah Teasdale, The Falling Star. And so I practiced writing just going all over the page, so it's kind of fun how you have to read it. And then lots of glitter, lots of shimmer inks. This is drywall tape. In case you didn't know about this, you can get this at like Lowe's or Home Depot, and it's great for adding texture. So I just love how this one looks. Again, very ethereal. Nothing on that one. This is a poem about fishing, and it was a poem that I thought represented my boys, because we had just moved to this house and there was a pond behind our house, and so my boys spent a lot of time fishing. They never went out in a boat, but they spent a lot of time fishing. So here is the poem, and then here is a couple pictures of my boys. I just cut those out. Cut out a brown piece of paper to make it look like a boat. Cut out these little things from cardboard, made them look like fish. Added some paper or some paint on the paper, and then drew fishing poles in their hands. I thought that was cute. This is a Langston Hughes poem called The City, and I love cities. I love that we live so close to Kansas City, and I go there anytime I can. The thing I did with this one was I took a whole bunch of clothing tags and I turned them into skyscrapers. And this was also featured in Somerset, and it was, they only did part of the page, so that's it right there. So if you looked at that, you didn't understand what it meant because this was the other half of the poem, and it also didn't show that this was actually not my words. It was Langston Hughes' words. So I kind of was wishing that they had shown that that was not my words. Another thick page, so I must have glued a couple of poems together. This was by Myra Cone Livingston, called The Dark, and I love the way I wrote the words. So I did it all in purple and blue. Then I went back with the white pen, and I wrote with the white pen in a spiral. I had to draw it first in pencil, and so the whole poem goes all the way around. Then I finished it off with some glitter paint. This is a picture, or this is a poem by Robert Louis Stevenson called The Swing, and I took some pictures of my kiddos when they were little, and I drew a swing set and cut out pictures of them on the swing set that day. And then this was just kind of a table of contents. And then that's the end of the book. The way I did this book was I used some modeling paste, and I put a stencil on here, an alphabet stencil, and I went over it with the modeling paste, let it dry, and then I painted it so it's textured. And then I added just some little bits. These actually are little things from envelopes where I've just drawn. I put an eyelet in here, an eyelet in here, put in some vintage lace, and then I added these little pins, safety pins, with these little tags that I made. I thought that kind of gave it just a cute little whimsical look. And so that's my poetry journal, and I love it, and I pull it out whenever I want to be reminded of my old days teaching elementary school, or if I just want to add a new poem, or if I just want to read some poetry. So thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Bye.